Okay, we are in Spider, which is the Python editor, and I have removed the windows that are normally on the upper right hand side here so that our interactive window could be larger. And we are just going to start looking at some data types. Computers manipulate data, and there are several basic types of data which all computers can process. And the reason they're called computers is because they were originally created to compute or do things with numbers. Okay, so what I've just done here is I have typed in a command asking Python to tell me what type of data is the number 1. And it uses the abbreviation int for integer, so it's telling me it's an integer. Now, if I do this, 1.0, it's telling me that is a float, a floating point number. Any number with a decimal in it is considered to be floating point, and it's represented, this number here is represented differently inside the computer than this one is. Okay, so they're considered two different types of numbers: integers that do not have a decimal point in them, and floating point numbers that have a decimal point. Usually you think of them having a fractional part, but if there's a decimal point in there, even if the fractional part is 0, it's considered to be floating point. So we get two types of numbers. We've got another type. str stands for string, which is, the term string comes from a string of characters. And strings are enclosed in quotation marks. They are also enclosed inside of apostrophes. You've got two choices. If you've got more than that, there's two other versions as well. And I just made a typo. The opening apostrophe must be matched by the same type of apostrophe. You can't have quotation marks on one end and an apostrophe on the other. So let's try that again. And it comes back and it tells me that that's a string. Okay. Now, so we've got three data types. Whole numbers called ints. Numbers with a decimal point in called floats or floating point. And text that has quotation marks or apostrophes around it called a string. And the fourth data type is called bool for short, but that stands for Boolean. And a Boolean, there are only two values of type Boolean. True is one. You can probably guess what the other one is. False. Now, here's something interesting. And it tells me that true is not defined. True is not defined because it is lowercase t. Python is case sensitive. The Boolean values are true with a capital T and false with a capital F. Any other spelling of true or false is considered not to be of type Boolean. Okay, so those are the four basic data types. We can do things with numbers. We got two types of numbers: integers or whole numbers, and floating point numbers that have a decimal point in them. We have strings that are text enclosed in apostrophes or quotation marks, and then we have two Boolean values, true or false, both with a capital T or capital F. And that's it. Those are the four basic data types in Python. Now, a couple of other things about Python. If we're in the interactive window here, and I just type in a value, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it just comes back and echoes that back to me. Now, normally we put commas in numbers, but we don't do that in Python. Python is considered a separator, and it thinks we just entered two numbers, the number 12 and the number 345. So you don't do commas, but you can do this. Now, when it prints out, it doesn't put the comma or the underscore in, but if you got a long number and you're concerned about readability, that's why we put the commas in. You're allowed to put an underscore in Python. We are also allowed to have negative numbers in Python. You can put a plus sign in front of it. You can put underscores in floating point numbers. Which we don't normally do, at least on the right-hand side of the decimal point. So those are those are numbers, floating point numbers, and we've got integer numbers. Okay, let's try a few more here. Let's that should come back and say bool. That should come back with an error message because it doesn't know what true is if it's a lowercase t. If we put quotation marks around it, even with a capital T, you should be able to figure out that's not a Boolean, that's a string. And we also have something called relational operators that produce Boolean results in Python as well as every other programming language. 1 less than 2 comes back and tells us that is true. It's evaluating the expression that we type in and returning it to us. 2 is less than 1 is false. Okay, let's just give ourselves a little more room to work here. The other direction, 1 is greater than 2. And you don't have to put spaces in here, but it improves readability. If you're just typing stuff in the window here, the interactive window, I wouldn't worry too much about spaces. But if you're over here and you're actually typing in a program, which we'll talk about later, then you do want to put spaces in between because somebody will be reading this program. I will be reading it for sure. You will be reading it. If you have mistakes in it, you have to go back and try to fix the mistakes. So we've got less than, we've got greater than, we've got greater than or equal to, and that's true. We have less than or equal to, and 2 is not less than or equal to 1, so we should get false for that. And if we want to do equality, this one's different. So if I want to know if 2 is equal to 2, I'm going to get an error when I do that. But if I do 2 equal signs, okay, that's the way you test for equality in Python. And that's a very easy mistake to make when you first start out. It takes a while to get used to it. But that's the test for equality, 2 equal signs. The single equal sign has another important use in Python, and that's why there's 2 versions of it. So the not equals, we don't have that symbol on our keyboard. What we do instead is we put an exclamation point in front of an equal sign. And so I'm saying, is 2 not equal to 2? And we should come back and say false because 2 is equal to 2. Okay. We can also check more than one thing. 1 is less than 1. And 2 is less than 3. Okay, now if you put the word and in between, notice the word and turns purple, by the way, too. If it's a reserved word, it'll turn purple, at least with the settings that I have on my editor. And 1 is less than 1 is false, 2 is less than 3 is true, and means both of these need to be true in order for this entire expression to be considered true. So I'm asking, is it true that 1 is less than 1 and 2 is less than 3? And that's not true. So the output is going to be false. On the other hand, if I say 1 is less than 1, that's false, or 2 is less than 3, I'm asking, and and or here interpreted just the same way as they are in everyday English. And means both, or means either. So I want to know, is it true that either 1 is less than 1 or 2 is less than 3? And it is true that 2 is less than 3, so I get true. So if I put the word and in between 2 Boolean expressions, a Boolean expression is something that's true or false. If both of them are true, the entire expression is considered true. If at least one of them is false, the entire expression is considered false. With or, if any one of them is true, then I get true for result. Only if they are both false do I get false for result. Okay. There is another option as well. You can do the keyword not, that also turns purple, so you know that's a reserved word. And I can give it an expression like 10 is less than 11. Now that's true. But if you put not in front of true, well, not true is false. So that's the value that we're going to get. Okay. Now, I said a minute ago that the equal sign has multiple uses in Python. We can either do 1 equal sign or we can do 2 equal signs. And we're going to take a look at 1 equal sign now, but we're going to do that in the next video.